in our last session we were introduced to the work of Rudyard Kipling and his Just So stories, and we looked at the very first one in the Just So stories book, How the Whale Got His Throat. And we left with this final question of, have you heard of this saying before, and what do you think it means? And how could this relate to how the whale got his throat? Well, the saying was, don't bite off more than you can chew, and this is something that we call an idiom, which means it's an expression which you can't really take literally. So it doesn't really mean exactly what it says, but we sort of get the gist of what it does mean. Now, don't bite off more than you can chew is some advice meaning, don't try something that is too difficult for you. Make sure that you can accomplish it before you do, otherwise you're going to set yourself up to fail. And how does this relate to how the whale got his throat? Well, the whale's going around eating things, and he's recommended by the fish to go and eat the mariner, who we hear is sagacity, which means wise. So obviously, the whale thinks this is going to be very easy, but when he discovers that the man is far wiser than he expected, that's where he's bitten off more than he can chew. That's when he's done something that is too difficult for him. He wasn't expecting the man to come up with a plan to be able to be released. So that's what the idiom, don't bite off more than you can chew, means. And hopefully with this session, we definitely won't be using that phrase in relation to our learning. So in this session, we're going to continue with our Just So stories, and we're going to be looking at inferring a character's thoughts, feelings, and motives, and we're going to use all the examples from the text for this. So our intention is going to be within this session for you to be able to discuss and explain the main events within a story. When you're looking at that story, then I'm going to hopefully see that you're going to be inferring a character's thoughts, feelings, or motives. So you can be reading between the lines. The story's not going to tell you exactly what their thoughts are, what their feelings or their motives are. You're sort of going to guess what they mean. And the way that you're going to be doing that is by finding the evidence to support your opinion in the text. So let's start with a recap on our last session. So Rudyard Kipling is the author of the Just So stories. So can you think of anything you can remember about him that we looked at last time? And our second question is, why was his short story collection called Just So stories? We came up with a reason for it last time, if you remember. So pause the video and I want you to think about those two questions. What can you remember about Rudyard Kipling? And then secondly, why was his short story collection called the Just So stories? Now hopefully you've got loads of different things that you can remember about Rudyard Kipling. Maybe you've gone off and discovered some more. And why was his short story collection called the Just So stories? Well, if you remember, his daughter Effie was very particular about the way he read his bedtime stories. They had to be just so, otherwise he would make him read them again. And that's why we're calling these stories the Just So stories, because they were created as bedtime stories for his daughter Effie. And in today's session, we're going to be looking at the second short story he created as a bedtime tale for his daughter Effie, and this one's called How the Camel Got His Hump. Now just remember, as with last time, this story was written over 100 years ago, so some of the language is going to be a little bit difficult to understand, so we're going to be using those same strategies we used in our last time to try and identify the meaning of these words so we can fully understand this text. And when we see them in this text, they're going to be highlighted, and we're going to have a chance to pause and think about what they mean. So when you see that word, can you get an idea of what type of word it would be? And can you come up with something that you could possibly replace it with that would still make that sentence make sense? And then we will look at the actual definitions of them. How the Camel Got His Hump. Now, this is the next tale, and it tells you how the camel got his big hump. In the beginning of years, when the world was so new and all, and the animals were just beginning to work for man, there was a camel. And he lived in the middle of the howling desert because he didn't want to work. And besides, he was a howler himself, so he ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles. Most excruciating idle, and when anybody spoke to him, he said, "Humph." Just humph, and no more. Presently, the horse came to him on a Monday morning, with a saddle on his back, and a bit in his mouth, and said, "Camel, O camel, come out and trot like the rest of us." "Humph," said the camel, and the horse went away and told man. So looking at this section of text, we've got 3 words, and these are 3 words that we're going to try and find out what they mean. So excruciating. If you notice, there's a little inverted comma before that, which means they've missed off a little bit of the word there. Then we've got a second word, which is idle, and our third word, humph. So pause the video and think about what you think they could be. So he ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles. Most, excruciating, idle. And when nobody spoke to him, he said, humph. Just humph, and no more. Well, looking at the definitions, excruciating, it's an abbreviation. That's why it's got that little inverted comma at the beginning. It's a little bit like a contraction where we put a inverted comma where we're missing out words. And in this case, we're meaning excruciating. And this means intense or extreme. We've got that word idle, which means lazy or inactive. And then we've got humph, and that's that sound that we make when we're annoyed by something, we don't want to do it. So we look back at that sentence. So he ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles. Most excruciating idle. And when anybody spoke to him, he said, humph, just humph and no more. So he was most extremely lazy. And when anybody spoke to him, he was annoyed. That's what we're trying to get across with these words. Presently the dog came to him, with a stick in his mouth, and said, Camel, O camel, come and fetch and carry like the rest of us. Said the camel, and the dog went away and told man. Presently the ox came to him with the yoke on his neck, and said, Camel, O camel, come and plough like the rest of us. Said the camel, and the ox went away and told the man. At the end of the day, the man called the horse and the dog and the ox together and said, 303, I'm very sorry for you, with the world so new and all, but that humph thing in the desert can't work. Well, he would have been here by now, so I'm going to leave him alone, and you must work double time to make up for it. So let's have a look at the 2 words that are highlighted in this. There's something around the ox's neck, and it's called a yoke. What could that possibly be? And he's asking the camel to come and do an activity, this thing called ploughing. What could that be? Pause the video, have a think about those 2 words, and then let's see whether we're correct with our definitions. Well, a yoke is a wooden frame attached to the neck of an animal. So think of it sort of like a harness. Something that can be attached to them so they can carry things. And ploughing, well, that's sort of that digging up the ground, preparing soil for planting seeds, something that you see quite a lot of farmers do. Maybe you do it in your garden when you're preparing flowers or vegetables. When we read through this section, look for those highlighted words and see whether you can work out their definitions as we go along. That made the 3 very angry with the world so new and all. And they held a palaver, and an indaba, and a punchayet, and a powwow on the edge of the desert. And the camel came chewing milkweed, most excruciating idle, and laughed at them. Then he said, and went away again. Presently there came along the Jinn, in charge of all deserts, rolling in a cloud of dust. Jinns always travel that way because it's his magic. And he stopped to palaver and powwow with the 3. Jinn of all deserts, said the horse, is it right for anyone to be idle with a world so new and all? Certainly not, said the Jinn. Well, said the horse, there's a thing in the middle of your howling desert, and he's a howler himself, with a long neck and long legs, and he hasn't done a stroke of work since Monday morning. He won't trot. And here we can see that first set of words, the palaver, the indaba, the punchayet, the powwow. These are sort of having conversation, having a conference, having a discussion. And the Jinn, a magical spirit, or another word for a genie, maybe. Phew, said the Jinn, whistling. That's my camel. For all the gold in Arabia, what does he say about it? He says, said the dog, and he won't fetch and carry. Does he say anything else? Only humph, and he won't plough, said the ox. Very good, said the Jinn. I'll humph him, if you will kindly wait a minute. The Jinn rolled himself up in his dust cloak, and took a bearing across the desert, and found the camel most excruciatingly idle, looking at his own reflection in a pool of water. "My long bubbling friend," said the Djinn, "what is I hear of your doing no work, with the world so new and all?" "Humph," said the camel. That word highlighted, bearing, means direction or path. It tells me that the Djinn is taking a path across the desert. The Djinn sat down with his chin in his hand and began to think a great magic, while the camel looked at his own reflection in the pool of water. "You've given me 3 extra work ever since Monday morning, all on account of your excruciating idleness," said the Djinn, and he went on thinking magics with his chin in his hand. Said the camel. "I shouldn't say that again if I were you," said the Djinn. "You might say it once too often. Bubbles, I want you to work." And the camel said, again. But no sooner had he said it than he saw his back, but he was so proud of puffing up into a great, big, lolloping humph. Lolloping humph? What could lolloping mean? Well, lolloping is to move in a clumsy way, bobbing up and down, and from side to side. So we can see sort of almost flapping around this great humph, as it were. "Do you see that?" said the Djinn. "That's your very own humph, since that you've brought upon your very own self by not working. Today is Thursday, and you've done no work since Monday, when the work began. Now you're going to work." "How can I?" said the camel, "with this humph on my back?" "That's made a purpose," said the Djinn. "All because you missed those 3 days. You'll be able to work now for 3 days without eating, because you can live on your humph. And don't you ever say I never did anything for you. Come out of the desert and go to the free and behave. Yourself." And the camel himself, and all, and went away to join the free. And from that day to this, the camel always was a humph. We call it a hump now, not to hurt his feelings. But he has never yet caught up with the 3 days that he missed at the beginning of the world, and he has never yet learned how to behave. "What's this, a purpose? That's made a purpose," said the Djinn. A different way of saying on purpose or intentionally. So that's the story of how the camel got his hump, and here's an illustration. Now, which part of the story do you think this shows us? So think back to the story we've just read and look at the image. What part do you think it actually shows us?
So now we're going to have a look at some questions just to check our understanding of this story. So question 1. Which of these phrases from the text tells the reader that this story is set a long time ago? Is it A, now this is the next tale? Is it B, in the beginning of years when the world was so new and all? Or C, he ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles? So which of these phrases from the text tells the reader that this story is set a long time ago? Is it A, B, or C? And our answer is B. Which of these phrases from the text tells the reader that this story is set a long time ago? It's B. In the beginning of years when the world was so new and all. Now think about this question. Why won't the camel work for man? What does the story tell us that could give us a hint as to what the reason that the camel won't work? Well, we get told in the story that he's excruciating idle. So this idea of excruciatingly or extremely idle or lazy. So we're told he won't work for the man simply because he's really, really lazy. So let's think about these two questions. Why won't the camel work for man? What are we told in this story that makes you think that there's a reason for the camel not working? And secondly, why does the author Kipling repeat the phrase excruciating idle throughout the story? Think about what that means and see whether you can link these two questions together. So in this case, we're told that the camel is excruciating idle, which means extremely lazy. And we're told that constantly because the camel doesn't change. He stays extremely lazy. And that's the reason why he won't work for man. And now a trio of questions. Who are the three that get mentioned of in the story? And what do they want the camel to do? When the camel doesn't do that, who do they complain to first and why? Have a think of these three questions and then come and join me when you've got your answer. Well, we know the three are the three different animals who are working for man at that time. So we know that these are the horse, the dog, and the ox. And we know that what they want the camel to do is the same as them. They want him to join in with the work and help them out. So we get told that the horse wants camel to come and trot like he is. We get told the dog wants the camel to come and fetch and carry like the rest of us. And the ox? Well, the ox wants him to come and help plough the fields. So we can see that there's three different things, but the main thing is they want the camel to come and work with them. So who do they complain to first and why? Well, looking through the story, you would originally think that it would be the man, but in fact they don't. The man simply speaks to them about the fact they're going to have to work harder. The very first person that they speak to and complain is the jinn, the genie. And the reason why they speak to the genie, the jinn, is because the camel belongs to him. We can see that when he starts getting told about what he's doing, phew, said the jinn whistling, that's my camel for all the gold in Arabia. So we can see that the three are the three animals, the horse, the dog and the ox. What do they want the camel to do? They want the camel to join in and do the work, and they complain to the jinn because the camel actually belongs to the jinn. It's part of his magical kingdom. After giving the camel his hump, the jinn says, you will be able to work now for 3 days without eating, because you can live on your hump. A couple of questions about this part of the story. What do you think the jinn means when he says this? And then, how do the camels use their humps to help them survive? Pause the video and have a think about those two questions, and come and join me when you're ready. Well, what does the jinn mean? Well, by giving the camel his hump, the jinn says he can work for 3 days without stopping to eat. But how does the hump allow him to do that? How does a camel use the hump to help them survive? Well, a camel's hump does not actually hold water as some people think. It actually stores fat, and the camel uses it as nourishment when food is hard to come by. So this allows a camel to travel far away from food sources and water sources and still survive, which is why you see camels in deserts and places that are not very good for growing crops and foods. So now we've reminded ourselves of some of the key points of this story. Now it's time to start thinking about our activity. In how that camel got his hump, the main characters have different thoughts, feelings and motives for their behaviour. So the three animals have a different reason for acting in that way than the man does. The man has a different reason than the jinn, and the jinn a different reason than the camel. And we can see these as ideas that sort of really show that their behaviour and the way they act makes sense to us. So we need to look at thoughts, a person's ideas and opinions on the subject and what they think about it. One person might like a certain sport, another person might dislike it. Feelings, a person's attitudes and emotions towards a subject, how they feel about it. So, for example, someone might like jelly, someone might find it a disgusting thing. And then motives, a person's reasons for their actions, why they do or say something. So if we think about our homework, one person might be doing their homework because they know they're going to get in trouble if they don't. Another person might be doing their homework because they really love the subject and the topic. So different reasons why they're doing that. And today we're going to explore the thoughts, feelings and motives of the characters in our story. How the camel got his hump. And your job is going to be to complete these sentences by selecting a word from a word bank which you think is most appropriate, which shows your real understanding of inferring those different elements. So those thoughts, those feelings, those motives for these different characters to do things. And then you can see the bottom activity is for you to explain how you feel the different characters feel. So how do you feel the camel feels, the three animals and the jinn? And you're going to have to explain why. So I want a because in these sentences. So now you're ready to go and do your independent activity. But just before you go, I just want to leave you with one question, which we'll review again at the beginning of the next session. And that's looking at one of the things that the jinn says right at the very end. And he says, you've brought it upon yourself. And the jinn says something very similar to this to the camel after giving him the hump on his back. Now I want you to go away after you've done your independent activity and bring it back for our next session. And I want you to think about, what does this phrase actually mean? And do you think the jinn is right saying it to our camel? So now time to do your independent work. So good luck, and I look forward to seeing your answers.